Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Raising Healthy Mothers. Today, I am excited to welcome Marci Carroll, who is a psychotherapist specialising in motherhood. Welcome, Marci.
Hi, Tasha. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And this is probably one of those, like, I've had you penciled in for so long. And it's like, I'm going to get Marci on to talk about this because I think therapy is such a key thing that no one talks about. And I've certainly not talked about in the 4 years that I've had this podcast. I haven't really had a chance to get a really great guest on. So yeah, this is one that has been like, I've been waiting for the right person, and here you are. So could you tell everyone a little bit more about yourself and how you got into psychotherapy?
Okay, yeah. So I suppose I've always had an interest and a fascination, kind of in the human mind and how the human mind works and what makes people tick and what makes people individuals. So my primary degree was psychology, and I just absolutely adored it. I loved every minute of it. And then I suppose, I qualified, I finished, and as I, said, I did love it, but there wasn't a clear path then, so it wasn't leading straight into an immediate job opportunity. Um, and 1990s in Ireland, it just kind of was like, oh, what's this? So I actually trained then as a teacher, like, this is a thing now that I will go and do and go and be. So a primary school teacher. And teaching was very good to me. But it was always there, that kind of that love for psychology and that interest. So I retrained in psychotherapy. Yeah. And then kind of over the course of a few years, I was doing both. And then children came into the mix, and now I'm full time in psychotherapy.
It's really interesting. So I think you said on your website, in your bio, and you kind of mentioned it there, like 1990s Ireland, like no one was talking about this thing. So where do you think that interest came from? If everyone, I mean, that's the same in the UK, right? Like everyone just bottles things up. It's like stiff upper lip, you know? So it feels like it must have felt quite maverick at the time.
Yeah, yeah. And where it came from, like I really still wonder about that. I don't know, um, because it wasn't kind of particularly, it wasn't being talked about at home. So, and was it that? Was it because it was that kind of gap? I don't know, that kind of sense of
Mm.
this kind of a bigger picture piece, I think, that I felt was missing. Because even in, and I know I do tell the story on the website, so that like even when I was doing my teacher training, like I'd be in the library to do an assignment, teaching plans with a deadline, and I just go down to the psychology section and start reading the books down there because I just found them so much more interesting. Um, yeah, so just yeah, it's just kind of always been
Always
in
been
me,
there.
that really strong interest. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And how did you then come to specialize in motherhood? Like, was that obvious to you when you started?
So when I first started the psychotherapy training, no. So it was the just the way things worked out, the timeline. So I finished my training just the month before my daughter, my first child, was born. I still had some clinical hours to do, but the training part I finished literally the month before she was born. And she was born, and I was not prepared at all for what was coming from the motherhood perspective. I had all the baby books, all the sleep, all the feeding, it was all about baby, had done all the kind of the shopping for the buggy, all that, all so baby focused. And I had no idea what was coming for me.
Mhm.
And so that's 11 years ago now. So, things have changed and are changing, but like that I was, with this qualification, with the qualifications I have, and it still wasn't on my radar that things were going to change so massively for me. Nobody was talking
Mm.
about it. So the most that had been said to me was, oh, you'll be busy, or oh, you'll be tired, or oh, things are going to change, this kind of, vagueness, but not in the sense of what was actually going to happen to me, to Marci. Um, and yeah, it was tough. And I experienced postnatal anxiety. And I suppose it was that sense of, what can I do now? How can I use this experience and all the theory that I had, but how to put all that theory into practice? How can I use this to help other moms not to have to experience what I did.
Mm.
Yeah, I went on a bit of a journey then, kind of trying to, I suppose, backtrack maybe and kind of integrate, the theory that I had. Like I had all the theory, but yeah, but it didn't prevent what happened, I suppose.
Yeah, and I
Mm.
think it's quite interesting that you said that about, everything, all the prep that you did do was very baby focused. What does the baby need? How am I going to, feed, look after the baby? And it is one of those cliches, isn't it? That people say, oh, the baby arrives and like there's no manual and you're not told what to do. But even more so, isn't it, with what about you and what changes and how and I think that's still the case now. And you don't do any prep particularly for that. And often actually I find it's like second time mums who are just so much more like, right, I know how it felt and I know it's going to be even tougher with a second child. So I'm going to do all of this. And it is really interesting. And it's like, how do you close that gap? How do you get first time mums to know that they need to prep for themselves, not just for the baby?
Yeah, and I know, like, so say I had a friend. I didn't have many people around. I was one of the first to have a child, but a friend had, and she called me pretty soon afterwards and said, everything you're feeling is completely normal,
Wow.
and gave me that reassurance. She was fabulous. But she said I didn't want to say anything beforehand because I didn't want to scare
Yeah.
you. And and I go back and forth even still about that, wondering about that. No, we don't want to scare people, but it was actually more frightening to be in it and not know. Um, so I went down the road of there's something wrong with me. Like
Mm.
I'm doing something wrong here. I internalized it. Um, yeah, so I suppose it's to prevent that for moms,
Mm.
that they don't end up with that kind of sense of isolation in it.
Yeah. And I think it is interesting because you're right. I think you don't want to you don't want to freak them out because, it's already happening for them. Um and also, how do you convey the sense that something is going to change and that it's okay? Because also it's hard to convey the enormity of it. I think it is impossible to really truly understand the change and what it means.
Yeah, and in both directions, like, but also it's impossible to convey that there's nothing like it. There's no love like it,
Mhm.
that intensity of that sense of connection with this tiny little
Mm,
person.
mm.
So it is wonderful as well, but I suppose it's the overall piece of it all just so much more intense
Yeah.
than you can imagine until you're in it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of guilt, isn't there? Of like, well, people tell me this is the most amazing thing I'm ever going to do. And why don't
Enjoy
I
every
feel
minute.
like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That enjoy every minute line, that is just not realistic. That is just not possible for anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Like
Yeah.
there's absolutely nothing that you could say you're going to enjoy every minute. So that the unintentional, but the pressure
Mm.
that comes with those kinds of
Yeah.
statements, it's just not realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's bringing kind of bringing all of that into kind of a wider kind of society conversation, and to recognize it. So where I'm what the piece for me, that kind of the framework was matrescence. So as I said, I kind of went on this journey, kind of all the kind of the tools, the self-care, the mindset piece. I went back to therapy, and the big piece that we worked on in therapy was self-compassion. Because I would have been my kind of default, my kind of coping mechanism was always to kind of dig deep, try harder. And it wasn't for want of trying, that wasn't what was the difficulty. So that actually worked against me then, because I was trying harder and harder and harder and harder, and it wasn't getting any easier. So the self-compassion piece was massive in that. But then the other big piece, and it wasn't until, I think maybe it wasn't until my son was born, so 7 years ago. I don't think I had come across it before he was born. I think it was kind of early days with him. And I came across Amy Taylor Kabaz, and she was talking about matrescence, and it was just, you know, like the penny dropped, everything clicked into place. I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. This is what
Mm.
makes sense of it. In the bigger picture, I kind of brought the context into it as well. Um, so matrescence is a framework for understanding the extent of the changes and the magnitude and the intensity of the changes that mums undergo. So it's on every level. So it's physical, it's hormonal, it's emotional, it's mental, it's our relationships, it's how we see the world, how the world sees us. So it's every aspect of our being, of our identity. And the only parallel with it is adolescence. So if you think of what happens with adolescence, the changes happen across all of those kind of areas as well. But the difference is that that's understood and that's recognized and that's allowed. And if you think of teenage years, like how long teenagers are given to undergo that transformation, what do we get? A few weeks, maybe a few
Yeah.
months. And the other big piece that really, was such a wow moment for me was like if you think of asking a teenager, when are you going back to childhood? And it's
Yeah.
just so ridiculous. Like it's such a ridiculous question. But for us as moms, when you go back to work, when you go back to the gym, are you back to your pre-baby weight yet? Oh my goodness, that one. Are you back to yourself yet? And we're not going back. We don't want to either. But it's the society, the expectations of, okay, back you go now. Yeah, we have a baby, sort out your childcare and you'll be grand. And as I said, it was that kind of parallel with the teenage years, like kind of putting it into, you know, if there was that level of understanding given to us, just how different things would be.
Yeah. Do you know, I've not really seen it or thought about it in that kind of context of like, can you go back to being a child once you're a teenager? Although I do remember being 12 or 13 and going, I don't want this. I want to go back
And
to being
that,
a child.
yeah, so that piece is in there as well. It's not to say that maybe we mightn't want to
Yeah.
in certain moments, So it's that ambivalence, it's that push pull.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but that it's actually just not possible. It's not
Yeah.
going back that we're aiming for. It's an integration of all of these
Mm,
changes
mm.
and settling into our new identities.
Yeah, it is so interesting, and I'm the same with you. I know I didn't come across the concept of matrescence until a few months into motherhood, and similar, like it was just penny dropped. Like I get this, I get it now. Like it is a change, and it is you know you can't go back because once you've changed and you can't go back to what you were. And I think it isn't like, and I think hopefully maybe a similar sort of understanding is also happening around menopause where you accept that there is an irrevocable change that happens and it potentially changes your identity. And it's like if you can understand that that happens in adolescence, it happens in matrescence, and it happens as you kind of enter the next phase of life. And it's phases of life, and each one is brilliant. Each one is to be celebrated, not feared or despaired or
Exactly.
forgotten about, pushed away, ignored. They're all amazing, wonderful changes that we're so in, like, as women are so lucky to experience. I mean, imagine being a man, you're just stagnant.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And this is where the self-compassion piece really comes in so strongly. It's allowing it, it's that kind
Yeah.
of softening, when you're pushing against it or fighting against it or denying it, it's not going to go away, but it becomes kind of that inner fight then, as an inner struggle. Whereas compassion allows for just the gentle acceptance.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think we'll talk a bit about self-compassion
Mm,
in a minute. But I want to kind of stay on this identity piece because I think this can often be a bit of a source of conflict as well because you say you get to kind of 9 months or 12 months postpartum and you're like, okay, right, now I've got to go back to work because that's the agreement I have with my work. And I think it's really common to actually feel reluctant because you're like, actually, I don't want to. I want to stay with my kids, or I want to have more time with them, or I want to, or do something completely different, because, maybe you've experienced this change and you're like, actually, I've got something different to offer the world. And I think that can be quite a hard thing because suddenly you're like, well, but I've fought hard for my career. I'm good at it. I've got to a certain level and I've earned a certain amount of money and I can't go back on it. It's anti-feminist to stay at home with the children, or, and that's really conflicting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where that's the societal piece and the expectations. And it's, that's what's done. You have your maternity leave and you go back, that's the expectation that's there. I think that is slowly changing. I think, but slowly,
Mm.
and it's hard to be the one to break that mold and to be, to break, to break out those expectations from, from work, obviously, first and foremost, who are expecting you back on a certain date, and also from family and friends, maybe. And it's, it's from a place of concern, but that kind of is, what will you do? Like, how
Yeah.
do you manage? What will you do if you don't go back?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's that wider society
Yeah.
expectation.
And also financially, like, I mean, it's completely, for the most part, impossible to survive on a single salary these days.
Yes.
And so the actual opportunity choice isn't really there, like for so many people. Um, and that's hard because there is again that conflict. And I guess that's where the mum guilt comes in as well. Because you're like, well, I feel like my gut is saying I need to stay home, but my head is saying I've got to go back.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the conflict that's in there of, I'm going back for financial reasons, but alongside then I'm also spending money on childcare. And it's just a bit of a, it's hard to win in it, that it's that sense of, um, yeah, kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, can't win exactly because there's also the pressure of, oh, so you're not staying home with your kids. There's that. That's
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah,
so now I'm excited and looking forward to going back to work because it's like getting back a bit of a sense of me and what I used to be good at. I mean, it's just absolutely full
yeah,
of
yeah.
conflict, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you mentioned there the feminist piece of kind of, how hard we fought to have our place in the workplace. But I suppose it's that kind of thing of, yes, you can have it all, but not all at the same time.
Yes.
That's the kind of piece
Yeah.
in it.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, let's talk about self-compassion. I'd love to dig a bit deeper into that because
Yeah.
I think that is a lovely piece, a lovely little reminder, if we can just have that to kind of come back to. What does that mean to you? What does self-compassion mean to you? And why do you think it's important in motherhood?
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's, because as I said, I trained as a psychotherapist, and part of my training was to attend therapy. And I went all in it. Yes, I was there as a training requirement, but I really did give it my all. Um, and found it so helpful and so beneficial. But it was coming up again and again from my therapist, self-compassion. And, I hold my hands up and say, yeah, I was kind of just kind of nodding, going, yeah, 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 no, I'm doing that. I'm being very self-compassionate. Um, and then back I went, and once I was in that place in early motherhood, I went back, and it was just from a completely different perspective of, oh, I actually really do now need to take this on board to
Mhm.
support myself. And because, as I said, my previous kind of mode would have been, push, kind of keep going, push through. And that just doesn't work when there's a
Mm.
baby and children involved, because that's not their way of doing things. So there's three components to it. So it comes from the research of Kirsten Neff, and she has three components. And I suppose it's kind of three scales, kind of X versus Y on three levels. And so the first one is self-kindness, um, as opposed to self-judgment, and the kind of the self-judgment is all of those shoulds, all of that kind of pushing piece. But to let go of that and to lean into self-kindness. And the self-kindness kind of mantra is, I'm human. I have my capacity to allow that it's the antidote to the super mom myth,
Mhm.
um, to allow myself to be human. So I love that part of it. The next one then is mindfulness versus over identification. So this is kind of our self talk and our thoughts, and we have over 60,000, 68 to 80,000 thoughts that the researchers are saying. They can't all be true. They can't all be right. And they're not all going to be kind either. So it's to really become aware of which ones you're allowing in, I suppose, really, and which ones you're following. And um, to kind of listen into your self-talk and to notice. And it can be quite confronting to notice kind of how you're speaking to yourself. And it's to I always kind of to talk to clients and kind of to myself, would you say that to your friend? And how many friends would you actually have left if you were speaking to your friends
Yeah,
the way you're
yeah,
speaking to yourself?
yeah, yeah.
So it's to kind of be your own friend, and to be kind to yourself. And then the other piece this was the piece that was massive for me, was it's a commonality. So common humanity, she calls it, versus isolation. And that's it's not just me. I'm human, but I'm human having a human experience that many, many other mothers have had before, are having. This isn't just me. And that's the piece that ties in so closely with matrescence, that matrescence is a universal experience. So there's quite a lot in it. I suppose that the bottom line is to be your own friend, to give yourself a break, to let yourself off the hook, and to allow for yourself that you're if it's feeling hard, it's because it is hard and your feelings are valid.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah. And I think that piece about the collective experience, it's again, it's not, I don't know whether it's just culturally, just not what we do very well. Um, I think because it can be so competitive. Oh, my child is potty trained, yours isn't, that kind of stuff. And so, it's- but digging deep and getting into that collective experience takes a lot of vulnerability, doesn't it?
absolutely. And again, this is where the societal cultural piece comes in, that that Western society is now so fragmented, I suppose. And the idea of the village, that was the traditional way of child rearing, and
Mm.
caring for babies, that the support of the village was there. And that's just not necessarily the case now for so many. And so that sense of isolation comes from that.
Mm. And it is really interesting because, the few times when I've got together with friends, whether it's just like one other kind of friend, family, or like a group of families for a weekend, and you really realize what it means to collectively parent, even though you're not, because we only see each other like once a year, we're not particularly like physically close. It's not like our kids know each other, but being able to just go, "I'm just popping to the loo," and you don't
Yes.
need to say, but you just kind of, "I'm just popping to the loo," and you know that you can step out the room and leave your children, and there is going to be an eye on them. They might not be like literally sitting there watching them like a nanny or a babysitter, but they are aware and they're there, and you can go off and cook and clean, or go and do whatever it is you need to do, safe in the knowledge that someone is there. And that collective parenting, I guess, must have just been what we did until about 100 years ago, 50 years ago, you know?
And so no wonder then we're all kind of going around dazed and shocked, at the
Yeah.
enormity, and overwhelmed at the enormity of it all falling to us.
And anxious as well. I mean,
Yes.
if I'm not here watching my child, no one is. And so of course you're going to feel anxious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's massive. Just that kind of contrast with how it used to be and how it still is in other cultures, and
Mm,
it's almost hard to imagine and to tap into, because
mm,
it's so alien and so
mm,
foreign. And that's where the idea of kind of building your own village, and you mentioned kind of mums groups and connecting in with those,
mm,
but you also mentioned the other side that can come up, unfortunately, in some of those, that sense of it can feel a little bit competitive. But I think that's actually often our internal talk
mm,
that we're projecting. I think largely every mum is going in with the same sense of vulnerability. Um, but sometimes if we're in that place of being really hard on ourselves, and if we're very anxious about, what stage the child at, we'll maybe hear what wasn't intended that way,
Mm.
but we might hear it as a, you know, as a competitive piece.
Yeah. 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 No, that, and exactly. It might not have been the intention at all, but that's what came across. Yeah. So interesting. So let's talk then about psychotherapy and how it actually works. What does it look like? And I think we sort of started talking about this before we kind of hit record, really, because a lot of
Mm.
these are the sorts of questions that I have for myself. Like, I feel like therapy is something that can be so beneficial for everyone, but there is a reluctance of like, oh, but that's only for really sick people, or that's only for people who have fallen, kind of gone completely one way, or there's a lot of stigma, isn't there, about I have a therapist.
Yeah, yeah, there is still, and you know, even the word itself, you know, it's just such a long word and a bit of a tongue twister, and you know, it kind of doesn't help itself in that sense. But it is basically at its core, it is talk therapy. It's an opportunity to talk through whatever you need to, whatever you want to. It's a safe space for you to use in whatever way you need to. Um, so that's one element. The other element is the relationship then with the therapist as a supportive, non-judgmental, um, compassionate listening ear. And then I suppose I'm trying to think through kind of the concerns maybe that people have. You know, what will I talk about? Will I have to talk about anything that I don't want to know? Absolutely not. It's I always say and believe and feel so strongly, you trust the process, that whatever needs to come out will come out. Um, the other piece that I believe so strongly is that everyone has their own answers in them. So it mightn't feel that way. We can get disconnected from ourselves, and therapy is the opportunity to reconnect and to really gently and compassionately look and see, well, what what has been blocking us. We kind of learn certain behaviors and certain patterns along the way that maybe aren't serving us anymore, and to gently notice those and kind of see, okay, might there be another way of looking at things, might there be another way of doing things. I'm completely biased, and I think everybody should have the opportunity to go to therapy. It's
Mm.
just, I truly do believe
Yeah.
it is a gift. My favorite book about therapy is called The Gift of Therapy, and that's what I believe it is. Just that opportunity, just to have your own place and space to go and to just be completely and fully you in whatever that looks like.
Yeah, and I think, going back to what you said before about how around the self-compassion piece is you have to catch yourself talking in a
Mhm.
certain way and realizing that you're being unkind and would you talk to your friend like that? But often we don't, because it's in our heads, and it's only when we verbalize it that we realize that we're thinking these things, because as you said, it's a thought, and it's over in a second, or it's a thought that you have reoccurring that becomes so normalized that you don't even notice it. And then when you say it out loud and you have someone say, well, would you say that to a friend? And you're like, oh, and that moment to stop, we don't do often enough, and have the right person to
We
stop
don't
us
have
without.
space to. We don't have space to. It's all just so busy, and actually, that can be a large part of the work. And so that piece about, yes, would you speak to your friend that way? But even there's a step even before that that comes in therapy, where I'll say, "Did you notice? Did you
Mm,
hear what you just said?"
mm,
And I'll reflect it back, and people go, "Oh, did I say that?" And you kind of offer the opportunity to them, how does that sound? What do you hear now, and having that reflected back, because we're so caught up, as I said, that 60 to 80,000 thoughts, that's a lot of thoughts. Like we just couldn't possibly process them all.
mm,
And so therapy is the opportunity then to notice the patterns that are there unknown to us in those thoughts.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I yeah, totally agree. Everyone, everyone is, and I like how you frame it as well, because you frame it as everyone should have the opportunity for therapy. Not everyone should have therapy, what do you see as this distinction there? And I think, why do you feel like people don't have the opportunity?
Yeah, it is that piece. I mean, that is how I feel so strongly about it, an opportunity, a gift. because it's just so powerful and
Mm.
it's so beneficial. Um, what are the barriers? It's stigma that it's just
Yeah.
not recognized or valued. Um, it's quite new, I think, on this side of the Atlantic. It's so much more mainstream in America. And it's just so much more mainstream and more widely recognized and accepted over there. It's just kind of dropped into conversation. Oh, my therapist said this, or I was with my therapist. And,
Mm.
the physical health analogy is you wouldn't think twice about going to your GP if there was a physical discomfort. Um, why should you have to suffer from any sort of emotional or mental
Mm.
discomfort? You don't have to carry that either. Um, if you're feeling that sort of discomfort, then you deserve help with it.
Yeah. And I think, what I found in the last couple of years of, since being a mother, um, so sometimes I would get to a point where I'm like, I need to talk about this. But I don't know who. I was always like, who can I talk to about this? And, I have friends and I have a sister, I have other mothers around me, but it was always like, but I want someone who is not close to me, not related to me, not, I don't want someone who knows me on a personal level. I want
Yeah,
someone, you know, removed, unbiased, I suppose, and not, doesn't have a stake in this, that they're who are just
yeah,
there because I just want to talk. And it always came back to, well, who can I talk to?
yeah, yeah. Because friends and family, very well meaning and with the best will in the world, they they want to help you, and the traditional kind of Western way of helping is jump in and fix, jump in and
Mm,
give the opinion, give the solution. Um, whereas within therapy, the kind of the guiding light and the understanding is you have your own wisdom and answers within you. There are things in your world that are blocking that. As a therapist, I'm certainly not going to add to that and block it even further by bringing in my opinions.
mm,
I'm going to give you the space to find to reconnect with that wisdom.
yeah. Yeah, 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 and exactly, that's exactly what I wish I'd had. I'm like, oh, it's fine because I'm going to see my therapist in a week, so it's fine. I'll come back to this. So what does a typical kind of session with you look like?
Yeah, and straight away, no typical, because everyone's different and everyone comes in different ways. So it's meeting people where they are.
Mm,
So the starting point is cup of tea, cup of coffee, come on in, settle. And that can take, everyone's so different, but that can take some people longer than others to actually settle in and settle into the session. And then it's very much, it's an open floor, open space for whatever the person coming needs to do. So they might need to talk through their week. They might pick up straight away from something we've been speaking about last week. They may start off with something that we talked about a few months ago and say, oh, this has come up again. Can we have a look at this again? Um, so psychotherapy is very, very much from the client. It's the client is the starting point, whatever the client needs to talk about. And
mm.
then we just go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, which is reassuring as well to know that it is like you've kind of holding the reins, so to speak. I mean,
Yeah.
my only experience of talking therapy is having sort of CBT type talking therapy over the phone, just self-referred for what was available on the NHS local to me. And it very much felt that he had an agenda. He knew he had like, oh, I don't want to say tick boxes because he was doing his best to meet me where I was, but I found myself saying the same thing every week. This isn't working for me. Like this thing that you're telling me to do isn't working for me. And it was like we went through sort of 3 months of me saying that, and I think that was eventually very off-putting, and I would put off actually booking in the next session because I was like, I'm just I'm gonna say the same thing again, and I mean, like, that's not to say I didn't see a benefit, and I definitely saw a shift over time in, I think, even just being able to capture the thought and, flipping it or just noticing it
Yeah.
obviously is a great starting point. But yeah,
Yeah,
it was off-putting.
CBT, yeah, CBT is quite structured, and there's kind of there's I can it's part of the toolkit, and there's kind of exercise. I'm trying to think of a better word than exercises, but exercises that you kind of go through and like that, noticing the thoughts, um, and kind of recording it. There's kind of templates and things to use. And I'm actually trained in CBT,
Mm,
but I see it as just one tool in
mm,
the toolbox. And actually, I generally introduce it at a much later stage
mm,
in the therapy. So the initial stages are very much, this is your space, that kind of sense of, okay, I finally have somewhere to go where it's not going to be met with judgment, whether intentional or unintentional, or it's not going to be met with advice or more shoulds on top of the internal shoulds. Well, you should try this, you should do that. Um, no, but people need space to work through
mm.
whatever it is they need to work through before that more structured level of kind of tools come in.
Mm, yeah, interesting. Yeah. No, that's really definitely sort of mirrors my thinking around that. That was like, there must be more. There must be something else you can offer me, but that that just wasn't the case.
And I suppose, that kind of speaks to the point of, I'm always saying to clients, let me know, and I check in with them regularly. How is this going? How is this helping you? Is this supporting you? Let me know if there's anything here that isn't working, that isn't supporting you. Let me know so that we can change avenues, we can change direction if we need to. So, that's a massive part of therapy, that not every therapist is for every person. That's what I was saying about, the kind of the
Mm,
core foundation is the relationship, and the right relationship, and to trust yourself, um, as to whether, is this the right therapist and the right type of therapy
yeah.
for me? Are my needs being met here?
Yeah, which is hard as well because there are
Mhm.
so many, obviously, so many different types of therapy out there anyway. But also, as you said, like it's about a personality thing. Do you click? Are you going to get on? And so, like, that can often be a bit of a stumbling block as well. Of like, I don't want to, pay for a session if it's you're having to go private. I pay for session, give up an hour or whatever it is of my time, and
Mhm.
discover that actually this person's not right for me. And then and that is, I mean, it's true of everything, but when you're an exhausted mum already, it's like that exhaustion of, I can't even face the thought of going through that experience.
Yeah, but I suppose it's to trust to trust yourself, even in that initial piece of choosing a therapist, and kind of whatever your wherever you're looking for them. And I know that myself, where do I start looking? So I know kind of here in Ireland, it's, the regulatory bodies, it's the IACP and the and IHIP are the ones, and then the British kind of equivalent, the BACP, I think is the acronym for it. And that they'll have a list of therapists, and
Mm,
to read through them and to notice, who do I feel drawn to, who do I not, and to trust even that initial part of it in choosing your
mm.
therapist.
Do you think it's important to see them online, in person? Do you think that is an important part of the relationship?
Personally, if at all possible, certainly for a first experience of therapy, because it is, because it's something new, to kind of take out as many barriers as possible. And the screen, with the best will in the world, just can be a barrier.
Mm,
So if possible, if available for a first experience of therapy, I would recommend in person. I'm going to say
mm,
again, if possible. I know it's not always possible. And
mm,
I know, especially with children and with a young baby getting out of the house. So when I did kind of go to therapy when my baby was so small, my therapist was fabulous. She said, bring her
mm.
with you. And that, I don't know how I would have done it without that. She was just brilliant. So she had I don't know how she set it up or how she had organized it, but there was a room that I could go into. I kind of arrived maybe half an hour before the session. I'd go into this room that was available to me, feed my baby, and then into my session with her fed and happy. And that was massive. I know that's not always available, but and that's why I offer a walk and talk service. So walk, talk, and coffee, where I meet mums in their local park. You know, they're out on their walk, they're getting their fresh air, their exercise, their vitamin D, and that's where we do the therapy session.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love that. You know, when I first heard that that's what you're doing, I just think that's brilliant because, as you said, you're ticking lots of boxes there. You're getting out, you're getting some movement, you're getting the fresh air, you're getting some, sunshine, hopefully, if you're lucky. But and you've got you're with someone who is supporting you, and I just think that is so valuable because it is so hard to get out as a
mm,
mum anyway to do
yeah,
something like going for a walk for yourself. And so yeah, I just think that's brilliant. And sometimes that can, when you're not kind of in that very formal setting of a room and you've got a chair and you're facing each other, sometimes it can help to just be next to each other and talk in that way, can't it?
yeah, absolutely. And I find, and the mums say that, that their ideas flow and their thoughts flow and they're kind of nearly in it without fully realizing. And the babies always sleep. It's incredible. The babies always sleep. I
Always, yeah.
always, but I think that's from, they're hearing their mum's voice, and that they know that they're safe and secure. And
Well,
yeah,
and it's safe and secure, but also because they know that their mum, whether they know it or not, are relaxing
yes,
because they're feeling safe and held by someone else, by being outside, by the movement is calming for both the mom and the baby. And the baby takes on so much of our how we feel. And so when we're anxious, the baby is going to be much more crotchety. And if we're calm and relaxed, they will notice that and they will sleep. And it's fascinating that you say that you always notice that people that they sleep. I mean, I run mindful breastfeeding sessions, and one of the components obviously is doing guided relaxations, and they're always like, oh, how's this going to work? And I have a baby, and I'm like, you will find your baby will relax.
yeah, to trust it. Yeah,
Yeah,
trust the
trust
process.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, I was the same. I was like, how is this going to work when you're trying to work with a baby in the room? But no, it absolutely
Yeah.
works. It is
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
So how can people find out more about you and get to know you a bit more?
Yeah, and so my website is Marci Carroll Psychotherapy, um, and then I'm on Instagram as Motherhood Matters underscore with Marcy. Um, so that yeah, the Motherhood Matters piece is kind of my umbrella term for
Mm,
all of the services that I offer. So motherhood matters, matters in the sense of, everything to do with motherhood. It's, everything is open for discussion, but also motherhood matters. And we'd say, well, yes, of course it does matter, but it's that piece of, is it recognized? Is it fully supported and accepted? But in motherhood matters, it absolutely is.
mm. Yeah, no, I love
Yeah.
that. And I love that it's got two meanings there. And I
Yeah.
think that is yeah, that is because it does matter. I mean, it really does. And as you said, we just absolutely undervalue it in society. So yeah, I'll put the links to all of those there. And I'll also put the links
Okay.
to the associations for psychotherapy so people
Yes.
can
Yeah.
follow up and find a therapist if they feel called to.
Very good.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us. This has been really fascinating sort of discussion about the sort of support that mothers could do with and have the opportunity to have.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tasha. And thank you for the opportunity to come on and talk about this. Thank you.